I am very excited to chair this session today about climate change disinformation. I don't think I have to explain how important this topic is. Let me just check if you can hear me because I seem to have some connection problems. Can you
Yes.
hear me? Okay, so apologies. I hope that technology will be on our side and I will not be cut off. But if yes, then I will come back. I'm very excited to chair this session, and it's my great pleasure to introduce the excellent speakers that we have us today. I think we will be able to learn a lot about this topic from different angles of what this is all about, what can be done, what is already done by platforms and scientists and so on. So I would like to proceed in the following way. I will introduce the speakers that will give each a very interesting presentation. And after that, I will just say still a few introducing words to introduce the topic, not just in particular when it comes to climate change, but also when it comes to what the Commission is doing in general regarding disinformation. So I will use this a little bit also for publicity purposes, but what is currently being done. But before I go to my introduction, let me introduce the excellent speakers that we will have with us today. So first of all, Stefan Lewandowski, who is chair of cognitive psychology at the School of Psychological Science at the University of Bristol. Then I have Marisa Jimenez Martin from Facebook, who is the director for public policy and deputy head of EU affairs. And we also have with us Emmanuel Vincent, who is director of the science feedback. You will also learn about these topics more. I think we really have a very well-rounded coverage. When it comes to climate disinformation, as you can imagine, as the head of unit of dealing with disinformation, all the last year has been about COVID-19 related disinformation. We have a monitoring program in place, and we have worked together extensively with platforms to take action against COVID-19 disinformation, including vaccines, in order to be able to emerge successfully from this crisis. The COVID crisis has shown very much how harmful disinformation can be, that even if excellent scientists come up with a record time with not just one vaccine, but several, the society's ability to emerge successfully from this crisis can be still very importantly impaired by hesitancy regarding vaccines and so on, which is very importantly fueled by disinformation spreading online with an unprecedented speed. So why to mention this? Because I think climate change is certainly one of the biggest challenges that we will, even if not the biggest one, that we will be facing, not just in Europe, but basically on the entire planet in the next years, decades. And I think it's quite clear that in order to be decisive action taken in this regard, it is also very important that we have the whole society on board. Only then do we stand a chance to fight against climate change if we can convince the whole society that we are facing a real existential threat. However, even today, where the effects of the climate crisis become more visible than ever, information about climate change is still often met with climate change skepticism, denial, and conspiration theories, you name it. We could be able to see it more probably than in the EU, that in the US, where still quite a significant percentage of citizens are not convinced that climate change is happening. And according to a figure that I came across, 70% of the public recognizes, only 70% of the public recognizes that most scientists agree on climate change actually happening. In the EU, the situation seems to be better. Looking at a recent barometer, Eurobarometer, it seems that only 6% do not believe, so to say, in climate change, while 93% of citizens see climate change as a serious problem. So this looks rather good, but it doesn't mean that this information that is spread about climate change, about the steps that need to be taken, cannot undermine the efforts that need to be taken in this area. And I mean, as we have seen regarding COVID, regarding other topics, the online environment is a fertile ground for spreading such information. That is why the EU has taken in the past years decisive action to fight online disinformation, and I would like to take this opportunity to say a few words what we have done so far to fight disinformation. Let me share a few slides to give you a little bit of overview. I will not be very long because I rather would like to give the opportunity for the speakers to present. Let me just check because we had some technical difficulties to put these slides on. Can you see the slides that I am presenting now?
Yes, I confirm that we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much because that's important to have some feedback. So basically, what we have, the EU has started to work on this since October 2018, even before. In October, the Code of Practice on Disinformation came into operation. This is basically a self-regulatory initiative with the participation of major online platforms that contains a wide array of measures to fight disinformation. This code of practice is already in operation for quite some time, and after more than 1 year after its operation, we have assessed it. It has proven to be a very useful instrument. At the same time, it also showed that more needs to be done. Also, as already mentioned, we have taken action regarding COVID-19 related disinformation, monitoring what platforms have been doing on this based on the code of practice. And based on all these, last year in the European Democracy Action Plan, we have announced that the Commission will issue guidance on strengthening the code of practice in order for this code to become a much stronger instrument in fighting disinformation. In order to prepare this, we have also had multi-stakeholder discussions and exchanges with member states, and all of that emerged the guidance that we have published last month. This guidance is basically aiming to set out how the code could be strengthened to become a stronger instrument to fight disinformation, to close basically the gaps that we have discovered, and also it becomes a tool, a bridge towards the Digital Services Act, because basically with the Digital Services Act, this code of practice will become a code of conduct with an enforcement framework behind. So from a purely self-regulatory approach, we are moving towards a co-regulatory approach that has, so to say, also more regulatory teeth behind. Just to give you an idea about what aspects the code of practice and the guidance includes, I would like to give you an overview, because this may be also useful for you when you listen to the speakers that will come after me. in particular speaking about what actions can be taken online to fight disinformation regarding climate change, and also what actions are already done by platforms such as Facebook to take action against disinformation. So the guidance and the code has no magic bullet, unfortunately, to resolve the issue of disinformation. However, it contains a big bouquet of different measures that can be used to diminish the proliferation of disinformation in the online environment. Therefore, one of the goals is to have more participation in the code of practice. So we invite other players, smaller platforms, players from the advertising sector also to join so that it can become a stronger instrument. And then you have here a very long list of measures. I will go only very quickly through them to give an idea. First, the demonetization of disinformation is a very important element of the fight against disinformation, because as long as the purveyors of disinformation are incentivized by advertising placement, so basically by financial incentives to propagate disinformation, the fight cannot be successful. So here we ask platforms and other players from the sector to take measures to avoid advertising placement next to disinformation. Then maybe for climate change, less crucial political advertising, but issues-based advertising can be also very crucial. It is also used in this domain. So here it is also important to take measures, in particular also to give transparency about such content. Then another important area is strengthening the integrity of services against manipulative behavior. What does this mean? As you are certainly aware, fake accounts, bots, and so on are often used to propagate different kind of disinformation by malicious players. Obviously, the methods these days are even more sophisticated. For example, deep fakes or opaque involvement of influencers, you name it. These are also methods used to propagate climate-related disinformation. So it is also important that platforms take decisive actions against that. Then getting to another element, empowering users. So it is also key that users are provided with the necessary tools to navigate better in the online environment, so that they have more information about the sources that they are consulting, that they have also means, for example, to flag harmful disinformation. It is important that they are confronted with information sources that are reliable, for example, from health authorities when it comes to the COVID crisis, and overall to design the overall architecture of online platforms in a way that it is not fueling the disinformation, but rather reducing it. And in this area, obviously, working together with researchers and fact checkers is also quite important. I think in the upcoming presentation, that will be also an important part of the measures applied or that can be applied efficiently, because content fact-checked by independent fact checkers and labeled can be a very useful and efficient means to reduce the propagation of disinformation content. For that, it is also crucial that researchers have access to data on disinformation, so that we also understand more about this phenomenon. And also it's crucial that fact-checking as well as other services are also applied not just in bigger languages, in particular English, but in also smaller languages or smaller member states. to round up the architecture of the code of practice and of the guidance. Of course, it is important to see whether the code and its measures are functioning. So that's why we foresee that effective key performance indicators are put in place to measure whether the commitments of the platforms have been implemented, and to monitor the code accordingly by a regular reporting exercise with relevant data to have more information about its efficiency and how we have to take this forward. Also, to have more information and transparency about the functioning of the code, the guidance foresees the establishment of a transparency center where the platforms would basically share their measures regarding the commitments they have taken with the relevant data. And as of course, this phenomenon, disinformation as such, is a fast-changing phenomenon. We can be sure that this will be also posing new challenges in the future. So the idea is that there is a permanent task force that can adapt the code to new challenges, let it be technological challenges, societal challenges, or legislative developments. So that is a little bit the short presentation of the EU code on disinformation and the guidance that we have just published. I think this can already give an overview of what are the little bit the elements that can help to fight disinformation in general. And I think many of these measures can be also very well applied when it comes to climate change related disinformation. So with that, I don't want to take more of the time because we have excellent speakers with us that can present us with very useful learnings. So I would, with that, like to give the floor to our first speaker, Stefan, who has done in the past years very important research, not just regarding this information, but particularly regarding this topic. So I am very excited to hear from your research and how you see this phenomenon overall, and what would you think are good replies or good ways to fight this. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I believe that you can now see my screen and also that you can hear me. So what I want to talk about today is climate disinformation and how to deal with it. And of course, in 25 minutes, I can only give you a very brief overview of both aspects of that issue. Now, let me first talk about the infrastructure that is underlying disinformation in climate change, because it turns out that the reason there is so much disinformation out there isn't just coincidence, or that there are, a lot of people voluntarily involved in this. No, far beyond that, there is definitely, without any doubt, an organized network of politically motivated actors who are actively trying to undermine the science and also political actions to mitigate climate change. Now, here are some thumbnail data from the United States, but it is not limited to the US. We also have a network of think tanks in Europe, spread all around Europe, that are also dedicated to developing talking points that are counter to the scientific consensus on climate change. And here's a link to work by Dieter Plebe in Berlin, who is one of the leading people in Europe analyzing those networks. And just to illustrate what I mean by that, here is a study done by Justin Farrell some years ago, where he looked at this infrastructure of climate disinformation in the United States, and looked at how all the actors that are disseminating this disinformation are connected to each other. And one of the interesting findings from his study, shown in the graph here on the right, is that institutions or individuals who receive funding from Exxon or the Koch brothers are more central in the network than those who do not. So the green dots in this network structure on average are closer to the center than the red dots. Now, what that means is that the funding is crucial in order to kickstart the talking points and to disseminate the information outward from this funded center to other actors who may do this for free. And the consequences of that are notable from the same analysis here. If you look at the linguistic or semantic similarity between the information that is disseminated by contrarian think tanks and what the news media and indeed American presidents are saying over time, then, as you can see in these two graphs, you find that the similarity between these two sources of information is increasing significantly, so statistically significantly, over this 20-year period. So what that is saying is that the organized disinformation that is being produced, if you look at those documents and you compare their content to that in the news media and American presidents, then you find increasing similarity over time, suggesting that this campaign is quite successful. Now, we can't be sure about the direction of causality here. This is simply an association, but it is remarkable nonetheless. And one of the mechanisms by which this may happen is a problem in the media coverage. Now, journalism 101 is that journalists should offer a balance of opinions in their coverage. And of course, that works terribly well in many situations in politics where there are two sides or three or four or whatever having opposing opinions. Sure, you should report all that. But it's very different when you're reporting a scientific issue, because what matters in science is the balance of evidence, not the balance of opinion. And so the American media, and there are similar analyses for Europe, exactly the same thing here. For a long time, the media gave equal voices to science versus disinformation, which is, of course, problematic. Now, that has improved somewhat over time. The media have learned their lessons slowly. But it's still the case that the few contrarian scientists still are disproportionately visible compared to the scientific mainstream consensus. And it's also true that press releases from businesses and contrarian organizations find more media coverage than science. Now, in case you're interested in reading more about this, I can pop the link to this report in the chat, which is something that was published recently by some colleagues of mine and I, where we outline exactly how this disinformation take place. So now I've talked about the infrastructure, I've talked about how this all gets out there. The question now is, well, what is it that is actually being put out? Because I think it's very important to understand what disinformation is and how it differs from scientific information. Now, we talk very often about science denial, and that term is quite well defined. There is a literature on science denial. It is very different from skepticism. And the way it differs from skepticism and scientific information processing is characterized by this overview graph here with the acronym FLIC, which refers to the various techniques of denial. Now, unfortunately, I don't have time to go through them all, so I'm just going to focus on one thing that, to my mind, is the most common aspect of science disinformation, and that is cherry picking. Now, let me illustrate this. There are countless examples. This is one that's particularly illustrative, I think. This was an op-ed in a British newspaper some time ago, 5 years ago, making the claim that the climate models are all wrong. Of course they are. That's always, these people always say that. In this particular case, they said, actually global temperatures fell by 0.7 degrees, equivalent to their entire net rise in the 20th century in 2007. Now, you may not have noticed that, yet that may have escaped you. And it escaped anyone who's looked at the data, because here are the data. These are global temperature data that show, warming. And 0.7 degrees is this much on that scale. The yellow arrow is the 0.7 degree fall that allegedly happened in 2007. Well, it didn't. So what's going on here? How can you make that claim? Well, the answer is what you do is you cherry pick. So you look at the long-term trend, you ignore it completely. You then look at the monthly data, which of course have a lot of variability and noise. And then you very carefully find and cherry pick a single pair of observations from 1 month to the same month a year later, where, you did have a 0.7 degree drop. But, it takes a lot of effort to find that and to then base the claim on that. Now, of course, I would say that I'm a scientist, so I'm not terribly, friendly towards people who misrepresent science. But can we find more support that this sort of cherry picking is actually problematic and that it is representative? Well, I think so, yes. Let me briefly tell you about a study that we did some time ago where we collected contrarian denialist statements from media and online. We also collected representative mainstream scientific statements about the same data. And we then asked experts to judge the interpretation of these data that have been converted from climate change to some other statistic about population trends or agricultural production, things that had nothing to do with climate change. So it was claims about climate and climate data, but dressed up without the politics, removing all pre-existing preconceived notions and presenting it differently. So it was a blind test, blind in the sense that the experts didn't know what they were judging, except the accuracy of claims about the data. And what you find here, you can ignore the parts on the left. The important thing here are the summary statistics shown on the right-hand side of the graph, where the contrarian statements are given a negative score. That means they're inaccurate and not suitable for policy advice in the judgment of the statisticians. Whereas the mainstream scientific statements, the gray bar, they're accurate and suitable for policy advice. So in this blind expert test, the denialist claims about the data just fail the test and are identified as being misleading. Now, that's non-trivial because we know from other research that exposure to contrarian misinterpretations about the data can reduce people's acceptance of climate science and their willingness to support mitigation measures. So it matters that people are being misinformed. A recent review of these effects found that it is much easier to mislead people than it is to provide a positive intervention that makes people more likely to accept the science and to support climate mitigation. So there's an asymmetry here that favors science denial over science, and hence it is crucial that we deal with this disinformation. So how do we deal with misinformation? Well, I, together with a very large number of colleagues from around the world, published a document about eight months ago last year, where we outlined the entire science of debunking and how best to do that. I popped the link in the chat in case you're interested in downloading that. It's freely available. In my remaining 8 minutes, I want to review very briefly what the problem is with misinformation and what we can do about it. Now, the first problem about misinformation is that it sticks. Why? And what does that mean? Well, it means that if you encounter some nonsense on the internet, such as that the Pope endorsed Donald Trump, then even if you subsequently encounter the correction that says, no, that's false, you may know that correction has happened, and you may tell us that you know it has been corrected and the claim is false about the Pope and Donald Trump. But nonetheless, you may act as though you still believe that a second later if I ask you to make inferences or to answer other questions. And that is because it is inherently difficult for people to yank out part of their mental model of a situation without having some replacement for that. So a correction is extremely difficult to process cognitively. And that's before we even get to politics or wishful thinking. This is simply a fundamental problem that misinformation tends to stick once it has been acquired. So one way to deal with that is to inoculate people. By inoculation, we mean that we warn people ahead of time that they might be misinformed, and we tell them how they might be misinformed. Now, the beauty of inoculation is that we don't have to know ahead of time what exactly people are going to be encountering. We don't have to know the content, but what we do have to know is the technique by which people might be misinformed. And when you do that, there is a growing and now I think very solid database of evidence that shows that telling people ahead of time how they might be misinformed protects them against being misinformed. Here's a recent study that dealt with COVID, but of course precisely the same thing applies to climate change, where we also have conspiracy theories abound about climate change. And in this particular study, the participants were shown these helpful graphics that are disseminated by the European Commission in part. And if participants are exposed to those helpful graphics, then in comparison to a control condition where they just played an unrelated video game, it turns out that the people who are treated with this vaccination, this cognitive inoculation, they're better able to differentiate between manipulative and accurate tweets, in this case about COVID-19. And although we've done the same across many studies, there's lots of different forms of misinformation, and it always works. Inoculation helps people recognize when they're being manipulated. And I will skip over the second study. It's making exactly the same point. What I do want to mention, though, is that since a lot of misinformation is conspiratorial, you may be interested in this handbook that we published about a year ago. That's now out in 12 different languages, which provides advice about how to identify conspiracy theories, where they come from, and how you can rebut them. So, to summarize, yes, inoculation is a very good means of combating misinformation in climate change or elsewhere, but it's not the only tool. I want to conclude by talking about one other of several tools that are available to communicators, something that is more affirmative and is not based on rebutting or protecting against misinformation. And that is simply to underscore the scientific consensus. What do I mean by the scientific consensus? Well, it's those three fundamentals. The climate is changing, humans are causing it, and it's a problem. Now, reduced to that essence of the problem, the agreement among climate scientists on this is sky high. The agreement in the literature is sky high. These estimates of around 97% were obtained actually quite some time ago. The latest evidence for the last 10 years is that that's now 99%. I mean, there really is no scientific debate about climate change. And it turns out that if you tell people that there is no such debate, then for very good reason, people tend to increase their acceptance of the science. It's particularly interesting and relevant that very often informing people about the consensus is particularly valuable for people who, because of their political views, might otherwise be disinclined to accept climate science. And that happens to be people on the conservative side of politics who are predisposed not to endorse climate science. Once they hear about the consensus, in many studies, not all, but in many, they're particularly willing to change their attitudes because they recognize the importance of a scientific consensus as a signal of the strength of evidence. And a final link that I want to also pop in the chat is that this alternative approach to communicating climate change, climate science, has also given rise to a handbook that is freely available for communicators. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I will stop sharing the screen. Now, I don't know if there's time for questions, but if so, I'm happy to take them. If not, then we defer discussion till later, I guess.
Stefan, I found it very impressive how you managed to condense years of very in-depth research in such a short time and in such an engaging manner. So I am sure our viewers have learned a lot. What I would suggest is that I would ask one follow-up question from the audience now that is quite directly related to what you have been speaking about. And then after we have finished all the presentations, then I will take the other questions from the floor also to combine the different wisdoms and backgrounds of our speakers. So what I wanted to take from the questions on the floor that have already arrived, Stefan, you have spoken a lot about these different methodologies that are used to spread denialism. And you have also singled out one. But one question of the audience is if there has been a change in the nature of denialism in the last few decades in the context of climate change. So what did you discern some trend in this regard about that you could update you? Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, yes, actually, there has been work done on that, and if I recall correctly, it was led by Konstantin Boussalis at Trinity. And what they've shown is that actually the proportion of misinformation that is denying the basic science has increased somewhat over time until recently, which is somewhat counterintuitive because you would think that the denialists might retreat from that and focus more on solution denial, that is, attacking clean energy rather than attacking climate science. But certainly from that one analysis, that did not appear to be the case. There continues to be an attempt to minimize or deny the strength of scientific evidence. Now, there's also, of course, solutions denial. I mean, that's what I call it, with people inventing, literally inventing a disease that doesn't exist, as far as we know, about wind turbines, for example. There's a lot of literature now that there's an organized campaign going on to get people to suffer from symptoms like headaches or anything else if they're exposed to a wind turbine. And there are some, very interesting stories about that, how these diseases only appear in communities that have been visited by the mining industry. And there are people who are presenting an invitation to citizens to suffer these symptoms. So, there's a lot of stuff going on against solutions as well. But interestingly, most of it still seems to focus on the science.
Thank you very much. Stefan, we will get back for sure with more questions to you at the end of the session. So thank you very much for this very good overview again about where this phenomenon is coming from, what can be done against. And with that, I would like to turn then to Marisa. As explained, Facebook is one of the signatories of the Code of Practice on Disinformation. And in that framework, it has signed up to an array of commitments to fight disinformation in general. In the past months, Facebook, among other signatories, has also reported extensively regarding the measures they have taken to fight COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines-related disinformation on their platform. However, today I'm extremely excited to hear about something different, a different topic, so about what Facebook is doing regarding climate change related disinformation. So Marisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christina. And I hope that the colleagues can manage the presentation because I've not been able to do it from here. So. But I'm sure that they will be fine. Thanks again for organizing this debate, and I am very encouraged and by the enlightening presentations that we've just heard. And I just wanted to say that I wanted to take a little bit of step back in presenting how Facebook comes to contribute to the area of sustainability, and in particular with regards to climate change. And I want to take this, taking a comment that was made by the previous speaker about the need to really bring in policies that are positive, as opposed to just addressing these type of issues from a negative standpoint, where we say we need to restrict things, we need to rebut things. We do. At the same time, these are complex issues, and they require also some positive policies as well. And the first thing that I would say is that this is in the context, or this debate is in the context of sustainability. It is, Europe really is at a crossroads when it comes to its future, and it's grappling definitely with the urgent need to transform its economy and its society towards a more sustainable path. We think ourselves that we can use the power of our platform and the technology for positive impact on sustainable growth, but also on climate change. And we're determined to do so because we think that social media and our platform can serve as a multiplier, giving communities with more tools to act. So we know that we need to act now, and we're committed to do so. And I think that when we talk about misinformation and climate change, this is also part of the Green Deal. So we need to we want to link these policies and this work that you're all doing and that we're doing as well in the context of the Green Deal. So yes, in this slide, so we start with building a sustainable business, as you can see on the slide here, but not everything is about what we do on our operations or our supply chains. It really is about the value of the platform as well. So just to give you an example, Facebook had in 2020, we had a goal that we've actually surpassed with net zero emissions for our operations, but we have new goals, and we will continue to do so, more aggressive goals to go to net zero emissions also for our supply chain in 2030. And we joined today the EC Climate Pact. So if we go to the next slide, please, getting more into our topic. It's important to understand how we deal with climate change and misinformation, coming from an understanding of what our approach to climate and sustainability is. And as I have been saying, it's threefold. First one is to minimize our environmental footprint, which talked about that. Second, to leverage our platform to develop innovative solutions and to build community, help communities do so. And the third is collaborate with others. And this collaboration with others is something that might sound familiar when it comes to our approach to misinformation that we go in a minute. So if we go to the next slide, let me just give you a few examples of that positive aspect of how to use the platform to address climate that I was just talking about, with 5 fundamental points. The first one is digital skills for our NGOs, for our users, for people that come to Facebook. It's absolutely fundamental. Without giving them the tools to discern, can do a lot. We can remove, we can reduce the distribution, but the most important pillar is that on inform, and inform starts by digital skills. The second, we've done also with NGOs, things like workshops and trainings all around Europe, and also really linked to the needs of each of the NGOs that come to us. The second element, a tool that is at disposal and that our NGOs, the NGOs on Facebook use, is ads credits. And this also might also sound familiar to many of you. And the idea is that we give them the power of ads to reach with messaging regarding climate change and to have impact in who they reach to. So ads credits is an important part of our approach. Then there is fundraising on Facebook. And this is $3 billion have been raised through this type of tools, and 65 million of them for environmental causes. There's some examples here as well as to, well, what about using the platform itself, our groups, for instance? Well, there's lots of groups at Facebook that are actually also used to fight against climate change denial, with groups like Collectif, Citoyens pour le Climat, Zero Waste, Earth Reforestation Project, with thousands and thousands and thousands of users. And this is also helps the reach the right messages. And last but not least, fostering a more sustainable lifestyle. So our platform has enormous reach. So how can we, again, it's about the reach, how can we use the reach for good? And things like channels on Instagram with Ozone, for instance, or TAP. Now, if you go to the next slide, we're moving there. We've seen a little bit about how the platform can be used as a source for good to reach with the right messages, for positiveness, for debates and discussion in these areas. If we go to the next slide, please. Yes, so we can now see, so how do we then innovate something that we should address? Right? It's, Facebook is it's a platform, it's a social media platform where people come and engage and share and give their opinions. So in case of doubt, we will always give, privilege to freedom of expression than anything else. At the same time, we want to make sure that the platform is a place that is safe as well. In that sense, our users tell us that they don't want misinformation on the platform. At the same time, there is no rule. We don't have a rule that says you cannot lie, right? So this is why it's so difficult to really address this issue. So obviously, we don't want to be the ones determining, what is true or what is false. And that's why it's so important for us to work with third parties. Those third parties that that have two types of characteristics. When it comes to the fact-checking community, they need to be fit to do this, in simple words. And to be fit to do this, the way that we have thought, the criteria that we have used is if they're certified by the International Fact-Checking Network. International Fact-Checking Network is an organization that will look at their impartiality or their professionality or the way that the fact checkers, so that they can actually be a fact checker under the International Fact-Checking Network. So that's one sense. We don't determine whether it's false or altered or not. It is that's why we rely on our fact-checking community. When it comes to relying or to connecting users to authoritative sources of information, we also work with international experts. We work with international organizations. And indeed, what today could constitute, for example, what today could constitute in the area of health misinformation, it could constitute an imminent risk of health, an imminent risk of harm. Tomorrow, that might not be the case. So we are dealing in certain instances with a lot of uncertainty. No one has the answers, but obviously we're trying to do these options or actions as good as we can, and we do rely in the recognized international expertise that exists. Again, with the caveats that sometimes there's uncertainty and that things change. For instance, just to give you an example, before a year ago saying a vaccine exists would have been one thing. Today, the vaccine exists, and there are a few vaccines available. So just to say, the way in which we act and the way that information is addressed changes not only with time, but with the circumstances as well.
Thank you very much. I think this is quite a good sentence to maybe continue with, and I think it's now the perfect time to turn to Emmanuel, who will be our last speaker. It will be very useful, I think, at this point, after hearing from the overall picture and general methods from Stefan, then from the platforms, from Facebook's point of view, from Marisa. And now Emmanuel can share his research and findings regarding from their perspective, because they are investigating web platforms' actions against science misinformation. And also it will be very important to hear how scientists can help to tackle this issue. So Emmanuel, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and please let me know at any time if you don't see my screen or you can't hear me properly. Otherwise, I assume it's all working. So I'm Emmanuel Vincent. I'm a climate scientist by training. So I was studying hurricanes before I moved to the US, and that's when I started reading the media and I realized there was a lot of misinformation, and I started working on trying to bring scientists and the scientific community into doing something positive to solve this issue. So I'm both the director of Science Feedback, a fact-checking organization specialized in verifying information on scientific topics, both climate and health. And I'm also a researcher at Sciences Po at the Media Lab, so studying disinformation. So a quick introduction about science feedback and what it does. So the concept of science feedback is to bring scientists to review the credibility of content. And in this illustration, you can see here, several scientists assess the credibility of an entire article, and they give it a credibility rating plus comment on what is correct or incorrect in the representation of the science in this paper, and a contrasting example in another article here. And so the goal of this effort is to inform the public, helping them find news they can trust, helping them find fact-checked information on search engine, for instance. But we also partner with platforms such as Facebook, and I will show you how we work on that end, as well as with journalists. So we connect them with experts, and we also provide feedback on their coverage. So here is an example of what you can read on climatefeedback.org. This is an example of a claim review. So in this case, several scientists that you can see here on the right have reviewed the credibility of a claim made by a journalist in Metro. And we also work with our own editors who facilitate the process, who ask questions to scientists. And in this case, the claim was that, we are going to have a mini ice age in a few years, which is incorrect based on current understanding of the science. And that's what the reviewers say and our review communicates. So on our side, you can see a brief overview at the beginning of each article, and then you can dive into the details if you want, such as the comment by the scientist explaining why the claim here is false. And basically they kind of, in this article, mistaken the surface temperature with the upper atmosphere temperature. So you can check the details if you want on the site. And when we are done with this, we provide feedback to the journalist. And in that case, the journalist changed the original article where there was this claim of a mini ice age in the headline, and the new headline after the correction basically became correct. So that's one of the ways we try to have impact. So kind of improving the coverage of climate change in the news. Now, we are also, as a signatory of the International Fact-Checking Network that was introduced before, we are also partnering with Facebook. And I want to give you the insight of what we see on our side, our end of things. So partners, fact-checking partners with Facebook, they verify trending news, they verify if the information is accurate or not. And the news, when a post or a URL, an article is identified as false or misleading, they become flagged in the feed of users. So users are informed, and you can see an example here on the right of a video on YouTube that says climate science destroyed in 8 minutes that was reviewed by scientists. And in that case, they found that this video contained false information, so that people on Facebook can see that and are informed. And so I'm also going to show you a couple of things we can do to verify what's happening to this post after the fact. So Facebook says that they prevent this false item from getting viral. And they also say that for the repeat offenders, those who publish misinformation repeatedly, they reduce the virality of all their posts. So we are going to check that in the next slides. So as for sharing, informing, as Facebook says, there is indeed this kind of information pop-up where when you want to try and share this article that was flagged as false, this is what you would see. So you could post anyway if you want, but you're invited to read the verifying article first, fact-check article. And here is an assessment of what the impact is on the virality of this specific URL. So it's one of these URLs that was flagged by Climate Feedback on Facebook. And you can see the rate of likes over time increasing before the publication of the fact check. And once the flagging is in place, the rate has decreased. So this is quite obviously an impact of the fact checking and the reduction of virality of this specific URL. So here I'm showing you an example where it's quite obvious, but sometimes if you look at all sorts of curves like that, you might not see as clearly an impact as we are seeing here. And now I'm moving to the overall impact on Facebook groups and pages that repeatedly publish misinformation. So the previous example was just on one post, but now I'm looking at all the posts of one group. In this case, it's called the Australian Climate Skeptics Group, and they have published a lot of misinformation. And whenever they publish something that was flagged as false, we put what we call a strike here in red. And there is this red area, which we call the repeat offender period, when they have more than 2 false within 90 days. So this is a period where we would expect that probably the reach of this page would be reduced. And we are measuring this by looking at the number of reactions per post that this page is collecting on average, and the number of shares and comments. So if Facebook is doing something to reduce the virality, we should see something here. And as you can see on this graph, we don't really see something on the entire red period, but we kind of do see a reduction at the end of the period. So it might be that after that many strikes, like maybe 12 false information shared, there is some reduction. So this is one group only that I'm showing here. And the next slide shows you 256 groups where we are averaging all their so-called no strike period when they have not shared misinformation, and repeat offender period in red when they have shared more than 2 false information within 90 days. And you can see the difference, the average difference the difference in the average of reactions, shares, and comments gathered by all their posts of all these 256 groups and pages. And what we see is that there is a non-significant difference, non-significant reduction between the two, except in the number of shares. So it could be that people who have been informed that this group share misinformation decide to share it a little bit less, but that's only a hypothesis that is hard to verify. So overall, it doesn't look like it has a large impact, whatever Facebook is doing against repeat offenders, as far as the data we have in our hands is concerned. But we wanted more to kind of test how we can check whether the impact of what platforms are doing, how we can measure with actual data on the ground to see what's happening. And here is another example where instead of trying to look at only the false information that we know at Science Feedback, we looked at the pages that claim that they are under reduced distribution. So we did the same thing, but looking at all the pages like this one, PragerU, where they publish a screenshot saying, look, Facebook is reducing our reach. So we know at this stage that Facebook has communicated with these pages and that we should see an impact on their virality of everything they share afterwards. But when you look at the number of engagement per post, again, for this specific page, around the date of the reduced distribution, you see that they are actually not decreasing and rather the opposite. So the number of reactions doesn't seem to be significantly affected, at least on this page. And now looking at the overall effect on many pages, again, that share this screenshot that say, look, Facebook is reducing our reach. So every single dot here is a difference between after versus before the reduced distribution message. And here is PragerU, where we see that we have this plus 140% increase in the reach, actually. So in the case of many pages, we do observe a reduction, but in some pages we observe an increase, right? And some of these are very big pages, and this is why in the previous figure that you've seen before, you don't see much of an impact on the average, because overall small pages are getting reduced, but some big pages are actually maybe getting more attention by saying we are being censored by Facebook. So the overall effect is not really to reduce the amount of misinformation, or at least the amount of posts that these repeat offenders get to spread after they have been fact-checked. All right, so this is it for the quick introduction on what Science Feedback is doing and how we can measure the impact of fact checks on platforms such as Facebook. And I would not like you to have the impression that I'm saying that Facebook is not doing something, because I think Facebook is doing the most of many platforms. They are partnering with fact checkers, they are transparent with some of the data, and that's why we can assess, as we've done, the impact of what they are doing. But things are happening on many platforms, and in many cases, it's not transparent. We can't really measure it, and we need to do it, I think. And again, I think also that not everything that relates to misinformation or to how people should know about climate change and act around it are related to misinformation. Most of what people need to know is simply basic information. And in that sense, also the Climate Science Information Center set in place by Facebook, I think is a very good step toward simply informing people about reality. So thank you. And if you have any question, I'll be happy to answer your questions now.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for this very interesting research. I would like to pose also one question to you that came from the public, and it's quite a universal and important one. It's about trust, that is a must, and as it is also quite a tricky question, I will then also give the other panelists the opportunity to contribute if they have also thoughts on that. But first to you, because you also spoke a lot about scientific evidence, how this can play out. So the question from Slido is, who can be actually trusted to send out information that can be trusted, because many citizens do not believe politicians, institutions, or even scientists from that you come. So how to get trust? Do you have any ideas on that indeed, how to improve the situation, or how to build trust with the audience in this environment where I think many people indeed are overall skeptical regarding information that they receive?
Yeah. So first, I think the situation of the lack of trust in experts or in India is actually something that is actively being cultivated. You know, there are now everybody can speak on the internet, so you have to gain. If you're not a scientist, if you're not a journalist, if you're not working with kind of very verification process and all of that, you need to say to people, don't trust these people, because we just make YouTube videos and we are as trusted as they, even if they work and they study a question. So there is a lot of incentive from people who want to misinform people to tell them, don't trust anybody, just trust us. So that's the first thing that people, I think, should be aware of. There is an active kind of effort to try and diminish the trust they can have in scientists. So on the case of scientists themselves, the way we do to see that scientists are experts on a given topic is that we check their publication records. So actually, if you look at a scientist and you want them to comment on whether wildfires are becoming more extreme, well, first we look at whether they have published scientific research in the top journals in science to see if they have worked on this issue. And we only invite those who have indeed studied this question, so they are the first-hand kind of experts on this. And if you do that, it requires some skills, but if you do that, you will reduce immensely the amount of misinformation you come across, because those people who do study these questions, they will give you answers that are state-of-the-art science.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Stefan or Marisa, if you want to add anything related to the issue of trust before we go to other topics that the listeners are interested in.
Yeah, on the topic of trust, yes, I can add something. I mean, first of all, of course, it's essential. It is also the case that scientists in most countries I know of, in Europe as well as the US, are among the most trusted members of society. I mean, that has been true for a long time, that continues to be true. Now, another interesting observation is that in several countries during the COVID pandemic, the trust in scientists has increased dramatically. In the UK, 2/3 of people about a year ago said that they trust experts a lot more now than they did previously. In Germany, trust in scientists early in 2020 tripled from previous years. Now that has sort of regressed a little again since then, but the pandemic has given a boost to people's trust in scientists. That's notwithstanding the fact that there is a very noisy minority that is not trusting scientists at all. Of course, there always is. But the population by and large at the moment trusts scientists more than ever before.
Thank you very much. Marisa, would you have anything to add on the question of trust from your perspective?
I think that, anything that I would say would not surpass what the panelists have said so far. So no.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I will start the next round of questions with you, Marisa. And this will be, I am trying to assembling a bouquet of questions related to fact-checking, because viewers have asked quite a lot of questions about these, and actually all of our speakers have in one form or another also spoken about this subject. Indeed, I think this is also a very widely used tools. The questions that our viewers have there are, for example, related to this association of fact checkers. So who is checking the fact checkers? How is this working? Then also another question is whether fact checkers can be informed or are informed about individuals posting false news. I think probably this means also like repeat offenders who are posting disinformation, misinformation. And also another question related to fact-checking from your viewers is how to basically deal with, again, this difficult balancing act between free speech and fact-checking. Regarding the skepticism that through fact-checking you could actually delimit or silence free speech. So I think these are quite some interesting questions regarding fact-checking. So maybe let's start with you, Marisa, and then I will also ask the other speakers to add regarding their viewpoint.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. So the first thing that I would say is that I think that fact-checking is one of the solutions, is part of the myriad of tools and actions that we can take against misinformation, but it cannot be the only tool that we use to address misinformation. So that's the first thing. On its own, it would be impossible materially. But also it requires many more areas, and that's what I was trying to articulate, at least just give some points before. When it comes to who fact checks, because obviously we said we don't want to be arbiters of truth, so who can be a fact checker? For us at Facebook, we took the decision that in order for it to be eligible to work or to partner with us in this work, we would want these fact checkers to be certified. They're a third-party reputable organization like the IFCN. It's true that there might be instances where the IFCN, there might not all fact checkers might be under the IFCN, but we, from our perspective, this is how we took as a measure to really warranty or to have a level of quality and fairness and determined. So we didn't want to do it. So it's the IFCN. When it comes to the question on free speech and fact checking, I think I tried to explain it before. The first thing to say is that the information that is fact checked, unless it is also falls into a category of immediate risk of harm. For example, like it was in the case of vaccines, certain vaccine misinformation, certain conspiracies, we would not remove the information. We would not remove the content, we would only demote, and we will also inform users. So it's not about, and I think that it's important, it's not about removing the content, it's about reducing its distribution. I want to say as well that if people or if affected users believe that piece of content has been fact-checked erroneously, or they want to appeal, some fact checkers have the ability to also review their decisions as well. And this is something that, but we don't, as a company, do not intervene in this conversation. So I would there. So it is complicated. It is not something that I think is, the only measure. Emmanuel's presentation before, appreciate the comments. I think it's really important that you continue to bring this to us. And I think, it was to make us better and to see and to contrast the information. So I'm not the expert here, Emmanuel, as you see, but I do think it is really important because that's the only way that we can make the program better and we can make our actions more impactful. But this is, it's not the measure that is 100% in any way. It's just one tool in the toolbox.
And I could add some information about the International Fact-Checking Network. So one question was, who is checking? So every year there is an annual review by an external assessor. So the assessor would look at random fact checks published by the fact-checking organization under review and look for issues with the balance, if some political parties are being more targeted or not. So look also for evidence of what are the sources that are used by these fact checkers. So there is all sorts of things that are being checked. And you can see that transparently on the International Fact-Checking Network website, and on the signatories, you can access for every single one of the signatories, you can access all of their yearly assessment. And users can also submit, if they see an issue, if they say, I think this fact check is problematic in some way, they can submit to the International Fact-Checking Network website. I don't know if it's a report or a complaint, but just submit it and the assessors will see it. So there is a way where a network of users can help verify what the fact checkers are doing. And I see there is another question that was asked. So somebody asked, can we inform fact checkers about individuals posting false news? I don't know about individuals, but usually people can just send an email or text to the websites of the fact checkers if they think these fact checkers should check something that is viral. So yes, people can inform fact checkers about something that needs to be verified.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I will also have some comments on fact-checking from the Commission point of view, but before that, I also would like to give the opportunity to Stefan to add anything that he may want also to share from his research on this.
Yeah, well, one thing that is probably of interest is to say that there's some recent work by David Grant and Gordon Pennycook that has shown that if you crowdsource fact-checking or credibility assessment of web sources to, people who are not trained fact-checkers, but you rely on the wisdom of the crowds and get a lot of people involved in that, they're actually doing remarkably well in the aggregate. People are really quite good at adjudicating the credibility of a source. I'm mentioning this because, there may be an opportunity there to think about ways in which this could be formalized or done in the future, taking great care that the system would not, wouldn't invite gaming. That is always the problem. If you make it wide open, then some people will go in there and will game it in their interests. But if you can deal with that, the public can actually, in the aggregate, do a pretty good job in differentiating good sources from bad sources.
Thank you very much. Maybe to add also from my side a couple of thoughts on fact-checking, because indeed this is also one of the measures that we ask to take more action in the new or strengthened code of practice. One of the requests in the guidance is, for example, also to use fact-checking in a similarly strong way across all languages and member states. This is not necessarily only the case. Another action that we also suggest is, for example, to integrate the results of fact-checking better into or together with other measures that are done. An example for these is, for example, placing advertising. So, for example, if content has been debunked by fact-checkers, this could feed into a system that is used for advertising placements, and this could then in turn also avoid the continued monetization and incentivizing of these players. And I mean, this also is an example how everything is a little bit interlinked in this area. Also to mention that the European Digital Media Observatory that has been set up also with financing coming from the EU, that is an independent institution basically that is providing help for fact checkers, for researchers, also to work better together on European level. And also, while so far EDMO has been set up at first by a central hub, now in the coming weeks the first regional national hubs will also start their work so that they can also be tied more into the different member states regions to have stronger action. And when it comes indeed to this issue of independence of fact checkers, the standards applied by fact checkers, I also want to indicate that actually again there is financing foreseen in the form of a pilot project that will actually the call is closing today that is providing funding for coming up basically with a code of conduct for European fact checkers, so that this can also increase the trust in this important player. So we hope to have good applications for that, so that this can be also a further action to support the fact checking community. Then going back to the questions from the floor before I will then turn to the final round of questions to the speakers. We received a question particularly for Professor Lewandowski. Basically, how should mainstream news media handle mis and disinformation that is circulating on social media? And maybe then also I would add the question from my side, that is this and misinformation only propagated through social media, or what role does editorial media or media play in this, and how you see this issue?
Okay, yeah, those are both great questions. I mean, let me first answer the second one about what role do the mainstream media play. There's a number of recent analyses of opinion pieces in the distribution of content in various different countries. And certainly in the United Kingdom and the United States, there is still the balance between scientifically oriented opinion pieces and disinformation is not what it should be. Let's put it that way. There are still plenty of outlets in the United Kingdom and also the US that publish things that are just propaganda, anti-scientific propaganda. It's as simple as that. So that is still a problem. It has improved over the last 10 or 20 years, but not, it's still a real problem. The first question about what should the media do about misinformation on social media, that's a really interesting one, because one of the real problems that we have observed recently is that things that start out on social media, when they have gone sufficiently viral on social media, the mainstream media then report that as news themselves. So one example that I can think of that has been analyzed in some detail where that happened is the so-called Pizzagate conspiracy from 2016 that was a complete, total fabrication, of course. I mean, there was zero veracity to any of this. The accusation was that the Democratic Party was running a pedophilia ring out of the basement of a pizzeria. Now, that's absurd to begin with, but, the pizza place didn't even have a basement. Now, that didn't stop a guy ultimately from walking in there with a gun, firing shots in his search for these presumed victims. So now what's interesting about this affair is that it started out on right-wing extremist chat sites. It then was tweeted, it was picked up somewhere else, somebody else tweeted it, and all of a sudden the mainstream media reported it as a thing on social media. So, and in the process, amplifying it and also normalizing it, giving it legitimacy, because once you start talking about something in the mainstream media, then it's no longer a fringe opinion. It's much easier then for that to become normalized. And that is a real problem. And so what should the mainstream media do? Well, certainly they should not uncritically import things from social media that have no validity. I mean, that goes without saying. They should not do that. Should they debunk things that are going around on social media as a countermeasure? Well, it's a tricky question because on the one hand, debunking is by and large positive. Those backfire effects that we used to be concerned about are not as widespread or as strong as we initially thought. Debunking tends to work, partly at least. So that would be a positive thing. But of course, the negative thing is that you're then talking about somebody else's agenda. This is the inherent dilemma with any kind of debunking. If you take on misinformation, you're talking about somebody else's agenda. You're not setting the agenda anymore, unless you do it as an in-depth investigation of what's wrong with social media and how things can go wrong there and what needs to be done about it. And so for that reason, what I would suggest the mainstream media should do, confronted with that, is to say precisely that, is to say, well, look, there's a real problem on social media because stuff goes on that can lead to, fairly terrible consequences like Pizzagate. And it may be the case that right now we have another one there. And by the way, what are we going to do about it? So that then at least has a framing to it that is not picking up somebody else's agenda while at the same time debunking. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you very much. And this leads maybe also to a question that also just arrived through Slido, and I think it's quite a tricky one. Let's see if anybody has some insight to that, because we have spoken today quite a lot about the consequences, the severe consequences that disinformation can have. I think through the COVID, we could all see it. And when it comes to vaccination campaigns, health issues, even lives put in danger. I think regarding climate disinformation, we have discussed this quite extensively today with a lot of insight, how damaging this can be if a society and politicians have to take decisive actions that have important consequences of everybody's life. But is there actually any data or research out there that could quantify or illustrate the actual damage that disinformation is doing to our society? So I don't know if any of you have any insight or research related to this.
I could add just a quick intro, but I think maybe Stefan has more to say. But I think we have evidence. I don't know about systematic study about everything, but we have evidence that people are influenced by what they see online. So if it's misinformation, then they are going to be influenced by that. And I think the actual evidence is quite easy to find in the terms of impact. For instance, what's happening in the US now with a significant fraction of the population who is rejecting the result of the election, saying that Joe Biden didn't win the election, while every fact-checking or every investigation that has been made conclude that there was no massive problem with this election. And I think it's a little bit similar also with COVID. People might be a little bit scared about vaccine and everything. That's fine, that's normal. But there is misinformation on top of that kind of brings many suspected negative effects. So people have that in mind. And I think the skepticism that people have about vaccines now that remains quite high in the population is another piece of evidence. But now I don't know if it has been properly demonstrated in a study.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with Emmanuel. What I can add to that are a couple of observations. I mean, first of all, there have been some papers recently that have explicitly linked misinformation to behavioral consequences with respect to COVID. And for example, one of the papers showed that there was a causal relationship between the amount of time people spent watching Fox News in the United States and their lack of compliance with social distancing measures and a consequent increase in the number of cases. So in that particular paper, you could trace the effect of a news source onto behavior and then onto people getting sick. Now, they didn't quantify that in dollar terms, but I mean, that was clear evidence of the causal problem. And that has been replicated. There's now a number of studies showing that specifically in the context of COVID. Now, the other thing you can do in the context of climate change in particular is to make use of the abundance of economic modeling that is out there, climate economic modeling. And you can model different scenarios based on different historical, hypothetical mitigation paths that we could have taken 20 years ago, and work out the added costs that we're now all facing from having delayed it by a certain number of years. And it is quite plausible to look at specific events, certainly in the United States Congress, where climate mitigation laws were proposed and were on the table, and they then didn't make it because of lobbying, because of disinformation, because of opposition of the fossil fuel industry. Don't forget that not that long ago, there was a bipartisan consensus in Washington about climate change being a problem that had to be dealt with. And it only became polarized later, in large part through lobbying and disinformation. And this is all stuff on the public record. So it would be very plausible to model that and work out what the dollar figure is. How many trillions of dollars our future generations are going to pay for those specific lines. As it happens, first of all, that research is underway. I know that. And also the Canadian government has just commissioned a panel through the Canadian Council of Academies to investigate precisely that issue. How much does disinformation actually cost us? And it just so happens that I'm on that panel, which is why I know about it. And we're due to deliver the report within about 12 months. And so even though I can't give you a dollar figure right now, we will have something more formal within the next 12 months.
Thank you very much. Marisa, would you have anything to add to this before we go to our final round?
So when it comes, the answer is that at least not that I know of, we have not quantified it in terms of money, but obviously the impact of misinformation is something that unfortunately we've also suffered as a platform in many occasions, where misinformation has actually caused harm to communities, and it's very close to us, and we have actually had to change our approach and change the way in which we deal with things. So in that sense, for us, we don't have to really quantify it to understand that how important it is for us to put measures to fight it, and definitely to make sure that our platform does not become the place for distribution. Even though I have to say that misinformation indeed is because of the reach, we have an important role, a fundamental role to play, but it would be probably not correct to say that misinformation is a problem of social media versus mainstream. However, because we do know that a lot of misinformation, in fact, in the last intervention of the professor of Mr. Lewandowski, we heard about Fox News. So just to say that misinformation is not a problem of the medium, but of course, we do have our responsibility to address it. And really looking forward to hearing that report that comes out from the panel in Canada. Very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think indeed that it's important to stress in all these debates that misinformation, disinformation is as such not new. I think it exists already since people live on the globe, but different methods of propagation ask for different measures, and that is what we have discussed today. Already existing measures, measures that are being tested, implemented, and so on. So my final round of question to all the speakers would be, this the understanding that I think we came to the conclusion that there is no magic solution, magic bullet, no one method that can from today or to tomorrow solve the challenge regarding climate disinformation. But if you, based on all the insight, the research, the experience that you have shared with us today, what would be the measure that you would advocate for to use more or to take full advantage of this when it comes to climate change disinformation? And I will now go in the same round as we started the discussion. So I would start with Stefan.
Yes. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, there's so much to touch on. I think what we have to, this is sort of taking a bit of a turn now away from what we've talked about so far, but I think it's crucial. What we do have to understand is the overall architecture and the economic contingencies in which all of this unfolds. And the online architecture and the way that we live in an attention economy where the platforms are vying for people's attention. And so there's a business imperative for them to offer information that is attractive to people. And unfortunately, attractiveness, given what we know about human attention, isn't always accurate information. Quite on the contrary, people pay attention to things that are emotive, arousing, that have negative emotion, that are novel. In other words, people will pay attention to fake news simply because that is how our attention system works. And I personally think that whatever we do about, we can talk about fact-checking, climate disinformation, misinformation, Fox News, whatever, anything you want, the fundamental issue we have to face is how human attention has been commodified online because that's how platforms make money. That's how Facebook, that's why it exists. It's because we pay attention and they can sell the attention to advertisers. And that incentive structure is effectively a machine that makes fake news almost inevitable simply because of how human attention works. Now, there is now a huge long chain of inferences from that to, how are we going to fix that? And so, but I just want to throw that out there as a fundamental consideration. And I know I've done this before. There's one last link I want to put in the Slack in the channel to a recent report that I was lead author on for the European Commission that examined this entire nexus between technology and democracy. It goes beyond our topic for today, but if you really want to understand the bigger context, then that might be a good start. So I didn't really answer your question, but I think it was important for me to give you the global context.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Then Marisa, from the platform's perspective, what would be a measure that you would particularly highlight from your side?
So first of all, it's really a pity that the questioning of the motives of social media to address misinformation are done at closing remarks, because there's not enough time to really have a conversation about what that actually means. However, if coming back to the topic, I think that if I would say a couple of things, one is investment, so continued investment, innovation, and above all, collaboration. I think that it is important to understand that this is something that we all need to fix. and that for us, partnering, whether it was with fact-checking community, whether it is with the research community and enhancing that partnership, whether it's with the European Commission or even other platforms to create that environment where it's not only about individual companies doing things individually, but also a group of companies and beyond. I think that is something that will bring us greater results. So above all, aside all the new measures that we could take, the work on the code and strengthening the code that Christina will need to do in the next months, it really is, at the end of the day, the word collaboration, which I would really want to leave this conversation with. And commitment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marisa, and indeed, we count very much on the strong collaboration and the efforts of all the signatories of the Code of Practice, and hopefully also new signatories to further step up the commitments in the code so that it can bring results for disinformation overall and also for disinformation on climate change. And with that, let me turn to you, Emmanuel. What would be a measure that you would highlight from your side?
Okay, so first I want to speak about what you mentioned about advertising. You say that it would be good that advertising agency can have access to data about misinformation. And we have a database that is available, so I'm sharing it in the chat here. It's called open.feedback.org. So you can see already the first version of that. And that links to my first recommendation. My first recommendations would be that platforms should use such data to inform users who have interacted with misinformation in the way that Facebook is doing, but other organizations like other platforms, YouTube, Twitter, and all other are not doing that. So use information to inform users and also to promote reliable sources. I think that's something that is very important. In my mind, fact-checking is useful to correct misinformation, but in the end, it has to be used to identify reliable sources and to promote them, and to not promote unreliable sources, those who do publish misinformation repeatedly. And I think platforms have a lot of improvements that they can do here, and the European Commission, I think, can help in that sense. And the last recommendation I would have would be for users, that they should be aware that, you know, not everybody who speaks about climate change and who seems to be an expert is actually an expert. So you probably come across books that are promoted and sold on Amazon, but I would really recommend people to look at what the scientists who work on these issues are actually saying about these books. So recently I've seen Disinformation book getting very viral, you know, selling on Amazon, but they are not written by scientists. They're not fact-checked by scientists. They're not validated by scientists. So I would really encourage people to, you know, look more and not just read a book, but look at what the scientists say. And they do, you can hear them on the internet. So that ties into teaching, which also I think is an important action to take. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for all these recommendations. And indeed, I think it's also important to add that apart from all these measures that we have discussed today, also media literacy is a very important component. And also the Commission is fostering initiatives in this regard to complement the different actions that can be done. With that, I would like to really thank to all the speakers, Stefan, Marisa, Emmanuel, for your excellent insight and excellent presentations. I have certainly learned a lot, in particular when it comes to climate-related disinformation, so I'm quite sure that it has been also very insightful for our audience. So great thanks for your participation. Great thanks also for all who have listened, viewed us in the past 2 hours and stayed with us. Thank you for the very good questions that you have seen have helped to have a very interesting discussion and to take the most out of this session. And then apart from all these thanks, and also for those who have organized this event and contributed to its excellent functioning, I also would like to announce the next session that we will have in Connect University this afternoon. So this morning we have explored quite in detail how important it is to have well-informed citizens when it comes to climate change, so that they can buy in to all the measures that need to be taken to fight climate change. And very well fitting with this, the afternoon session that will start at 3 o'clock will be about engaging citizens in green, digital and fair transition. So I hope that many of the audience will join also that session. Thank you very much again to speakers, audience and everybody involved. Have a good lunch break. Well deserved. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.